you would like to comment on morning sessions or whether where you have the chat available. But I remind you, if you have questions, you can put those in during the talk or after the talk, but please use the Q&A box rather than the chat if you can, because that just keeps everything organized. Participant numbers still climbing a bit at the moment, so I'll give this another couple of minutes until that levels off. 57.
I'll be right back. Sorry, once.
Sure, no worries. Okay, we just still people coming in, so just a couple more minutes. Okay, you all set, Emily?
All set.
Okay, brilliant. Well, let's get going then. Welcome everyone to this first GIFcon keynote. We are delighted to have with us Emily Selove, who is Associate Professor in Medieval Arabic Language and Literature at the University of Exeter, where she convenes the Exeter Centre for Magic and Esotericism. You have probably read in various publications about the new master's program that is starting at Exeter, which Emily designed, the MA in Magic and Occult Sciences, that is launching this year. It is very exciting. I'm just going to post Emily's profile in the chat rather than read out every one of her considerable achievements. So I'll just give like a couple of brief high points and then we'll go into the talk. So she's worked on Uninvited Guest in medieval Arabic literature, both as a researcher, a scholarly writer, and as a translator. She's produced a textbook on medieval Baghdad with a companion in cartoon form. And her most recent book is The Donkey King, Asinine Symbology in Ancient and Medieval Magic, which is a Cambridge element. Her paper today will draw on a current legal-funded project, or recently funded project. I don't know quite when the project formally ends. I'll call it Sorcerer's Handbook. And so I'm really looking forward to this, so I will stop blathering on and let Emily get going. Thanks for joining us, Emily, and really looking forward to this talk.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be a part of this wonderful conference. Let me just share my PowerPoint with you. I'm hoping that you can all see this.
Yeah, that looks good.
From beginning, how about that? Does that look good?
Yeah, that has just loaded in now,
okay.
So we've just got the slide you're on.
And that seems to be working correctly. Alrighty, wonderful. Okay, so this is the story of the demon named Shauhab, or at least I think that's his name. Like most of the names in the 13th century book of magic that I'm translating, the vowels and even the consonants aren't always clear. This is partly because the scribes who wrote the manuscripts on which I'm relying lived centuries after the author. It got passed down from scribe to scribe. The author is Sirajuddin Sakkākī, and these scribes were clearly often confused by his grimoire. Here's one example. I know not everybody probably reads Arabic here, but this is an interesting passage about a female practitioner of magic, kind of a rare bird among mostly male practitioners in this manual, named Sa'aduna the Indian. And here it says that she's a woman skilled, if you can see that first underlined red word. This manuscript copied from that manuscript, and you can see a worm actually ate a hole in the middle of that word, and then it was patched up. So that when this manuscript copied from that manuscript, it said that she was a woman pregnant with this knowledge. This manuscript also copied from that manuscript and said that she was it seems like probably a slave girl, Jariya. So you have Hadika, the worm-eaten word, Hamila and Jariya. This is just my favorite example of scribal confusion. There's something like this in virtually every line of this text. So the text is a real mess. Sakkākī himself is mainly famous now as an author of the Arabic language, grammar of the Arabic language that he wrote late in life. But he wrote his work on magic much earlier, not long after he switched careers from metalworking to scholarship in magic. So he was quite a novice in scholarly Arabic when he wrote this book himself. It is obvious that he himself was confused by some of the texts that he compiled into this book. So he gathered lots of texts, but maybe didn't always completely understand them himself. And it includes a collection of talismans, charms, invocations, rituals to summon various entities, including the jinn, which are genies, and children of Satan, like Shauhab. There's ample evidence of confused scribes and scholars in the history of this text, and I am the most confused of all. Here's one picture of a page that confused me. It's sort of a talismanic invocation here. Sakkākī, I mean, I make no secret of the fact that my forthcoming edition and translation will be filled with errors that arise from centuries of groping in the darkness. So much so that it would have been almost pointless to attempt this translation in the first place if it weren't for the fact that the Juma al-Masjid Cultural Center in Dubai retains a copy of a manuscript that is a little less error-ridden than the rest of them. If you Google Sakkākī Kitab al-Shamil, this is the manuscript that you find. As you can see, this is a Christie's auction record. I actually asked Christie's to pass my letter on to the anonymous buyer of this manuscript in hopes that I would be able to take a look at it. They never answered me. I imagine them as a secretive sorcerer relishing their exclusive access to the dark secrets in the Book of the Complete. Exclusive, that is, until I publish my own translation. I have no idea how or when the digital copy of the manuscript was made or how the physical object wound up at Christie's. But I do know that this is the same manuscript as in the photocopy that used to be obtainable from the Juma Masjid Center in Dubai. It's kind of disappeared from there since. And I know this because the picture that Christie's used to auction the manuscript is the same as this photocopy of a talisman for the demon Shauhab, which here you see copied into that second manuscript I showed you, the one that had the wormhole in it. It's kind of funny to see the scribes attempting to copy these pictures. You can see they really struggled with this particular talisman, which is unusually complex and has these little bits on it of a sort of magical writing that seems to be an adaptation of various ancient languages and signs, and it's something very unusual. It doesn't occur, these particular types of symbols don't occur in the other manuscript. And if you can look at how the scribe kind of failed to render these, you can see that he was a little confused. He seems to have taken this sigil or character or whatever and almost turned it into the word Allah. So make Allah as in God, to make it something a little more familiar to him. I think the scribe is just a little bit artistically challenged. This is his attempt to render a talisman, a kind of lust or love talisman associated with the demon Shauhab. You can see it's a bit wobbly, but one reason that I want to highlight this particular talisman is to emphasize that the fostering of love, or you might say kind of aggressive lust, is one of the things that Shauhab is used for, which will become important in my presentation. And it's sort of notable given that he is kind of a frightening and somewhat satanic demon. This is how you go about summoning Shauhab. Like most of these medieval Arabic demon summoning or jinn summoning rituals, it takes place in an empty house, in a magic circle with particular incense. All of these ritual techniques were adapted from the Arabic text by medieval Europeans, which is why you will find this so familiar from sort of European culture and pop culture. All of these things kind of pass through Arabic, which a lot of people don't realize. But let me just read this through so that you get a sense of how these rituals are done. So Shauhab, son of Father Bitter, that's a name for Satan, has a mighty kingdom and many servants. If you wish to craft with it, empty a house and draw a mando. This is a magic circle or a square on the ground. Sit in the square, say the words, and suffumigate with the incenses, which are black and white pepper, ginger apoponyx, yellow sulfur, ficaria, ash tree, gum ammoniac, blue and black bdellium, costus, aloes wood, sandarac, and the seeds of Satan's hemp. A couple notes on that. Seeds of Satan's hemp was the result of an emendation that we made to the manuscript, so a little bit tentative, but it does seem like it's possibly referring to sort of marijuana seeds. Yellow sulfur, if you burn in an enclosed space, it could kill you or give you lifelong breathing problems. So just like a little safety note on that. Say the words while casting fear from your heart. Then engrave the seal on iron, and if you are unable to use iron, then write on a piece of blue cotton fabric. Then take a piece of wax and make of it sleeves for the iron, placing the seal in the covering such that the iron or cotton is entirely hidden within. I just want to note again that Sakkākī was a metal worker, and quite a lot of his manual gives very practical advice on how to actually make the talismans in a sort of craftsman-like way, and with some quite handy tips that you can use cotton if you can't use iron and things like that. So that's kind of characteristic of his collection. You hang all this in a triangle, read the incantation, and suffumigate with the incense until you summon, by recitation, around 15 beings with red eyes and hideous appearance, carrying weapons to do war with you, but do not be afraid. Until the 15th night, Shauhab the king will come with his servants and helpers. Then make the agreement and the contract with this oath below, which we'll talk about. Then if you want to summon them, hang the seal and say the words, and he will appear and be sent on any errand you wish, and they will obey you. And then it says this. As for the seal which I described to you at the beginning of this essay, this is the image and the seal of Shauhab, son of Father Bitter. When Shauhab appears, he will be riding an elephant, and he is a big snake. His astral ritual is extremely terrifying, and his seal has many ramifications, which I will describe to you after the seal. And this is the seal. And this is the seal. This seal that was in the Christie's auction. And it's so notable. Now look at how the manuscript kind of diminishes to a point here, the text does, which I've attempted in some small way to reproduce in my translation by reproducing the line breaks. This is the only time in the manuscript this happens as well. So there's just a lot of kind of unusual and notable things around this ritual that brought itself to my attention, and this is kind of diminishing text shape is one of those things. So a few things to bear in mind as we go forward. In rendering these invocations, my translation philosophy unevenly wavers between the traditional demands of philological rigor and the sense that the root of the power of magical language is poetic inspiration. This is based in part on an Arabic saying that poetry is sihr halal, which means halal sorcery. It's sorcery that you're allowed to do. But there's a long history of comparisons between poetic and magical language across multiple cultures. Incidentally, this is the kind of the blueprint for a mandal or a magic circle. These are a couple of articles, one that I wrote about magic is poetry, poetry is magic, another article that I recommend on the subject, she makes reference not only to Sufism, which is the mystical branch of Islam, but also the ancient Greeks, medieval Europeans, romantic poets, marshaling all of these sources in support of the perception that poetry can convey the inspiration of heaven beyond rationality and guide us back home in a sort of Neoplatonic journey back into heaven. But is also capable of affecting events on Earth. So like magic, kind of balances between the heavenly and the earthly. It transforms the whole being of man, including his corporeal body, not by rational thought, but by intuition, and poetry itself being a kind of synthesis of all this. So some of the key points about this article I like. And in talking about why poetry is like magic and vice versa, which has informed my approach to translating this book of magic. So perhaps ideally, a methodology of translation of Sakkākī's invocations would also stem from the unification of rational philosophy with inspiration. Though that might be beyond my abilities as a scholar and a poet, I have made some attempts, especially in my translation of the invocation to the demon Selove, which lends itself uniquely well to the endeavor by kind of hovering between sense and sound. I've read this poetic invocation of Selove in public on 3 previous occasions. The first time, my colleague Maziar Ghiabi, a scholar famous mainly for his work on drugs and intoxication in Iran, asked me to present in his workshop about radical approaches to recovery and convalescence, mainly from drug addiction. I think he was just trying to fill up a space in a panel, but I wanted to oblige him, so I scrambled around in my translation. I found that reference to marijuana and the Selove ritual that I mentioned. I wove this together with some musings on Carl Jung, and I produced the following text, which I will read here only in part. So this is now me reproducing my presentation from Maziar. Sirajuddin Sakkākī is famous mainly today as the author of the Miftah al-Ulum, or the Key to the Sciences, a book about the Arabic language. But during his lifetime, he was known as a court magician, first serving the crumbling Khwarezmian Empire and then a Mongol Khan in that role. It was a time and place of notorious unrest. In addition to the turmoil caused by the Mongols themselves, the so-called assassins or Hashashin were at hand, only one of many factions contributing to an unsettled environment. This is the background against which Navid Kirmani's The Terror of God, Attar, Job, and the Metaphysical Revolt reads the poet Attar's Book of Suffering. So Attar is the famous Sufi mystical poet of the Conference of the Birds. Incidentally, that Navid Kirmani book, The Terror of God, I just highly recommend that book. It's a great book, so I wanted to mention it. Sakkākī is not like Attar, remembered by his biographers as a mystic wise man. These biographies do not portray him as a victim of his circumstances, but as an active player in the turmoil. He's a little more evil sorcerer and a little less mystic wise man. Just to take one example out of many shocking stories told about him, he is said to have magically doused all the fires in Baghdad and prevented any new fires from being lit until a vizier who had offended him in that city agreed to kiss a dog's ass. I see his book of magic as being a book of its time and place, which is to say it is dark, complicated, and dangerous. But just because he wasn't a wilting violet doesn't mean that he didn't experience trauma, having lived through this unrest. As he writes in a poem, "Tell me, how many disasters will you hurl at me, O time? Don't you know that my patience has worn thin?" It is clear from his collected works that he suffered. It is also clear that he was a pious Muslim of a microcosmic complexity, wrestling boldly with all of God's creation and taking a hands-on approach to the problem of evil. Maybe it is because I came to this text during my own dark period of convalescence and grief that I have privately read it as a shadow work, a Jungian nigredo, a term that Jung adopted from alchemy to describe the process of bringing forth and processing darkness and finding a place for it in one's own cosmology. Jung's essay concerning rebirth describes this process. It begins with the Quran's Surah Al-Kahf, the chapter of the cave, a surah which deals with all that is hidden, occult, impossible to understand, and even horrible to human eyes in God's creation. Like the surah itself, Jung starts with the 7 enchanted sleepers in the pitch darkness of their cave. They kind of miraculously sleep there for 100 years. It's one of the miracles described in the Quran. He moves there from the silvery, lively fish who escaped from Moses' grasp and hid itself in the depths of the 2 seas. In the darkness of the cave in the ocean, the fish appears as a spark of inspiration, and it leads Moses to meet the wise man Exeter. So there's a scene in the Quran where Moses meets this mystical wise man, and right before he meets him, this fish that he intended to have for lunch kind of miraculously revives itself and goes into this mysterious place where the 2 seas meet. So these are all kind of symbols of inspiration found in darkness that Jung addresses. This wise man, Al-Khidr, goes on to do strange and dark deeds in this chapter, killing a boy and scuttling a boat, all while enacting God's obscure plan on earth. So God had a reason for him wanting to do these things. And some Sufis have argued that Satan also did evil in fulfillment of God's hidden plan. In verse 50 of the Surah of the Cave, God asks, would you take Satan and his children as your close friends in place of me? The answer to that question, like the Surah itself, might be complicated. That's my interpretation. In his essay, Jung compares Moses' journey to Faust, bargain with the devil. Faust is the dark side of the coin to Moses, but they are two sides of the same coin nevertheless. Both Moses and Faust sought answers in the darkness. But Jung describes the Faustian bargain not as a successful therapeutic wrestling with the shadow, but rather as the first step towards madness. To Jung, the difference between Faust and Moses is one of entering into productive dialogue with the shadow versus surrendering to and being overwhelmed or even intoxicated by it. Sakkākī's ritual demon magic is aware of this danger. Although he summons the darkness of his own accord, he seeks to protect himself against this devouring power with ritual preparations in a magic circle, like these on the screen. Christopher Marlowe describes Faust's bargain in much the same terms. Just like Sakkākī's demon summoning rituals, Marlowe's Faust, if you go look that ritual up, struck a deal with the devil in a magic circle. He specifically mastered his fear. He bound the demon with sacred oaths before signing a contract, all things in Sakkākī's text. But things didn't end well for Faust, and they didn't end well for Sakkākī either. He died in jail in 1229 after losing a battle of magic in the court of a paranoid Khan. So he kind of fell victim to his dark magic in the end. And his text is full of danger. But as for me, I found something inexplicably healing in its darkness, something that has, like Moses's fish, eluded me when I sought for it in the light. So that was my part of my presentation for Maziar's workshop. During this presentation, I also read my poetic invocation to Shauhab and kind of took myself by surprise when a little emotion crept into my voice. I think I took the audience by surprise too, and it ended up being a little more of an invocation than a scholarly recitation. One of my students followed me out of the room afterwards, across the University of Exeter's beautiful garden landscape. I think he'd gotten the impression that given the subject of Maziar's workshop about drug addiction and recovery, that I was myself a recovering drug addict because I had taken this kind of confessional tone, as you just heard in my presentation. And he was very tactfully trying to get me to tell him that story. In order to correct his mistake, I ended up confessing to him that I wasn't recovering from drug addiction, but from grief about the death of my father. And in telling him about this, it all came out in terms that I never really said out loud before. And that night I had a dream about my dad that was just incredibly healing and moving. And at the end of the day, long story short, I attribute all of this to the fact that I had invoked the demon Shauhab poetically, and had broken down the walls of governing campus dialogue, and seemingly also the walls between the living and the dead, and the seen and the unseen, and waking and dreaming. The second time I read the invocation was at the Occulture conference in Berlin. I knew I had to do something a little more entertaining than a regular conference presentation because the Occulture conference caters to both practitioners of ritual magic and to scholars of the occult, having academic presentations in the day and rituals at night. This is a picture of Kevin McLaughlin's presentation, which I thought was funny. After my presentation, the file in which I invoked Shauhab again, the file from my computer and the printed version that I had disappeared. I don't know how else to say it. They just disappeared. I cannot find them. I don't know where they went. It was spooky. They were occulted. I've looked everywhere. As you can imagine, I also attribute this strange happening to the demon Shauhab. As I mentioned before, his invocation comes with this weird little diminishing piece of text, and it actually comes after this large lacuna or missing bit of the manuscript as well. So I now consider him, among other things, the demon of lost text, and I think he stole my presentation. Incidentally, that photocopy is now gone from the Juma Masjid Center in Dubai as well. So hold on to your books because I'm about to invoke Shahab. The third time I did it was at Yale. I was now by then expecting something weird to happen after I did the presentation. So I invoked the demon Shahab at Yale not long ago. After the presentation, this is going to sound silly, I went to a restaurant and I ordered tortellini. They brought me trout. I guess tortellini sounds like trout. And then this waitress lady came and told me this long story about how she had gone trout fishing and gotten pulled into the water by the trout. And because of the fish, the importance of the fish, and that story that I tell in conjunction with the invocation, I again started reading kind of signs and symbols into this, but then, I thought, well, maybe I'm just crazy, maybe I'm seeing things, but this is what happens. This is when you start mixing scholarship with poetry and letting it get a little more personal, especially when you're studying the occult. I sometimes jokingly say that Shauheb and not the Leverhulme is the true patron of my research because of the way that he seems to kind of haunt me. But it's probably just, I guess it's probably just a coincidence or a happy accident about the trout and the tortellini. That said, happy accidents and unhappy accidents and coincidence and chance have so much to do with how this text has been preserved throughout the ages, what is lost and what is retained, that in a way, part of my translation philosophy is to kind of embrace that a little bit playfully, half serious, half playfully embracing this kind of the so-called happy accidents. And my favorite example of this little experiment is this. This is a poem that, this is actually a Persian invocation to a demon found in this collection. My Persian isn't very good, but Sakkākī lived in a very Persian-speaking world, and he sometimes addresses the jinn in Persian. And when he does this, I get my friend Argavan Moharami to help me read the Persian invocations. And I invited her over to my house, and truth be told, we had a couple glasses of wine. We read this Persian invocation. I produced this document here. I completely lost it. I lost the document under a big stack of papers, forgot that I'd done it. Argavan reminded me later, and I was like, oh God, where did I put it? And I dug it up, and I looked at it, and I realized that there was something kind of compelling about the look of the thing itself. So I reproduced the line breaks and the crosses out and everything in this form as a kind of a found art object almost. And the reason that I did this is because I figured that this could kind of stand for the way that these manuscripts were preserved by people working together. So people working together, but things getting lost, a little bit of human error as well as human cooperation came into this text being created and then lost and then found again. And what's more, by reproducing these line breaks and crosses out and stuff like that, it also helps preserve the look of the manuscript. So one thing that's lost when you translate a manuscript is all the beautiful little scribal errors and crosses out and corrections and worms eating through things. You lose a lot of the just physical life of the object of a manuscript itself. So inspired partly by people like E.E. Cummings, the surrealist poet, who wanted a poem to look as well as sound good, a poem as a physical art object. I translated just this one invocation in this fashion. I don't think it can really be read out loud because it's quite a writerly text that resulted. But there's certain things like, you who are speaking to me are obligated, cross that out, you must speak to me. Like somehow that seems evocative to me of the kind of impatience and eagerness of the invocation, that it's like, strike out the translationese, you know, you must speak to me. And there's certain things like shouting, don't make sound like dog, and a woman giving birth yelling and stuff like that. With little Persian asides here, you know, my friend Argavan is from Iran and speaks English with an accent, and I feel like weirdly my transcribing her teaching me what this invocation meant, like almost a little bit of her accent crept in, and all kinds of interesting fun things were preserved by doing it in this way, or I thought that they were interesting anyway. So happy and unhappy accidents are to thank for all of this. This is not my conscious artistic creation. It's chance. Like the tortellini and the trout. The choice is ours, whether we regard these accidents as a cause for joy or for despair, whether we read them as bleak evidence of the hopelessness of our endeavor. We can never read what Sakkākī really wrote or what he really meant. It's lost. We could feel despair about that. Or we could see the hand of fate in all of this. We could choose to make a kind of leap of faith and say, well, maybe these are the voices of demons and ghosts reaching us improbably and even absurdly through these serendipitous circumstances, a kind of playful engagement with that idea. The choice can really only ever be a matter of faith, the choice between two equally unverifiable options. I am proposing with this new theory of translation, which I call the dream theory of translation, that we choose the latter while humbly admitting that we are choosing from a place of helplessness and imperfection, because this choice creates the proper literary attitude, an attitude of playful, self-effacing optimism in approaching the translation of a highly obscure, radically other type of text. Because it's clear that our manuscripts are corrupt, the work of befuddled scribes, without, crucially, the oral line of transmission from master to student, which is such an important part of this tradition. That's been broken at some point. But it's unlikely that every word was ever crystal clear. Like a dream, the details are always melting away into darkness. This is the nature of the occult. To consider the act of translation of such a text not as a hopeless task doomed from the start by these ambiguities, but rather as an ongoing conversation with the dead or the unseen, and as a serious but poetically playful engagement with the meanings just beyond the reach of human understanding, puts us in the correct balance of humility and confidence to honor this tradition. And this is also something that I'd really like to explore in the Magic MA, which it was kindly mentioned in the introduction, as a way of allowing students to, on the one hand, you know, really engage with and learn and master the traditional methodologies of the Western Academy, like philology, which is the foundation of my studies. That's editing and translating manuscripts, looking things up in the dictionary, all that stuff that's crucial. But at the limits of that, to playfully kind of launch into the unknown with some creative responses, some experiential embodied ways of learning and knowing. So to dwell in those moments of uncertainty and let them be a place that my students and I can both kind of stretch our methodologies a little and do something a little more fun and creative as well. So I'm going to read you the invocation to Selove now. First, I'm going to put the footnotes to my translation up as a kind of protective talisman. These are apotropaic footnotes. Sakkākī tells us in regards to a similar such invocation that if you mispronounce the words, you might die. Given the state of textual corruption in these manuscripts and my own personal failings as a scholar, I am definitely about to mispronounce the words in this invocation. The distinction between scholarship and magical practice and between poetry and invocation is now urgent. It is a matter of life and death. These footnotes are here for our protection. This is to reassure us that this is not magic, but scholarship. So if everybody's ready, I will now read my invocation. Let me have a sip of water first. I conjure you, O Shalhub, son of Father Bitter, by the right of Satan and by the right of Lakis, white and black, O mighty one of the severe tormenting dominion, yours is the godhead of land and sea. By the right of O Constantail and O Jarjak Jail, take vengeance. O pitch of black the refractor and El Qatil the killer, hated angel of God. O Shalhab, daughter of Father Bitter, the gem lease with your white brother in the Lakis. O Harka, O Markama, and O Shalhab, by the right of the seal of the hidden words. O Lashati, Kahati, Hakafi, Kaham Hayil, flayer of brothers. O Kasli Makamiya Fahma Ala Safi Kam, brother of brothers. O Marku of the gate. Ashki ha la fatiyata la fakaha ha, fire poker bluish of eye. O Abu, O Markashin, March Markahin, O Rakshahin, O sin of sin, and O Karka Rahin, of you is the brother, the lover, the bounty, the countenance of Kashanaka and Farwanaka and Hashinaka. O white of black, O Shauhab, I shall be. That is the poetic scholarly invocation. This is we'll see what happens tonight. You can see if you get weird dreams. As if this presentation hasn't been weird enough, I'm going to now tell you a dream that I had about this project. During the years in which I have studied and translated the Book of the Complete, I've had dozens of dreams about this project, which have influenced my understanding of the text in more ways than I can count. Pierre Lorry has written that the jinn or the jinni were believed to be capable of interfering in daily life, albeit in a very special dimension between dream and waking consciousness. This in-between dimension, which is referred to for explaining not only relations with the jinn, but also with the souls of the dead or with angels, is of crucial importance for understanding Muslim approaches towards the domain of the paranormal. This in-between dimension is the very locus of translation, the borderline across which meanings are communicated. And I also refer to my dreams in respectful recognition of the fact that the scholars from other times, places, and cultures that I study consider dreams important sources of wisdom. So why shouldn't I? Why should I be contemptuous of them? I copy here directly from my dream journal. I meet the scribe of the original manuscript, the son of the man who wrote it. This is Sakkākī's son, who was indeed involved in the transmission of his father's text. I shake his hand. It is thin and weak. Shaking hands is a novelty to him. He seems like a nice kid. We discuss some of the errors in the manuscript, some already there by the time he copied it from his father's notes, and some which he introduced in carelessness and ignorance. I verify that a list that I translated is negated by the word la, which means no, which at the beginning. The first words of the manuscript, written like a salutation of a letter, are a colloquial version of don't worry or don't fret. He admires my cooking. So that was the dream. And, you know, there's a lot in here that's interesting and true, and I probably could have got it from somewhere other than a dream, but it came to me in a dream, so why not acknowledge that? The role of Sakkākī's son is very important. The idea that there's weak scribal hands, that his hand is thin and weak, and it's created difficulties. The idea that the word la, just one little word that means no, could drop out and change the entire meaning of a paragraph. This kind of thing happens all the time. And Sakkākī's own human carelessness or ignorance, as it puts it, was also at play. Also, there's the idea of my own cultural distance from this boy, that I reached out my hand and he found that awkward and unfamiliar to him. He found my appearance unfamiliar, and that cultural distance lends another layer of misunderstanding to centuries of scribal error and complicates the task of conveying the text to an English-speaking audience. Although I recall Sakkākī's son looking puzzled by my foreign appearance and by the unfamiliar gesture of my extending my hand towards his, he nevertheless took my hand in a good-natured and friendly manner. For the interaction depicted here is one of two human beings acting in kindness and good faith, hospitably extending their hand to the other. The final message of the dream is don't worry or don't fret. but rather persevere in the spirit of good faith, while simultaneously acknowledging the many difficulties inherent in the enterprise. And the admonition of don't worry also echoes the warning in the ritual to Shauhab. He is terrifying, but do not be afraid. He might be a child of Satan and a giant snake riding on an elephant, but his invocation is used in rituals of love. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's a wonderful presentation, both in terms of the stuff you're examining, but also particularly, I think, in your reflections on process. It's really nice to hear people like talk about how they do things and talk about the sort of creative interpolations. Like I think too often academic writing tries to seal itself off as it was always the conclusion you were reaching towards, rather than like talking about the way that it's built and constructed and the way that it works on suppositions and thoughts, that it is a creative process as well as one built on a series of existing philological, a series of other people's writings. We have plenty of time for questions, so please do add questions into the Q&A box if you have them. I wonder, there was a passage that Terry Wendling posted into the chat during the last bit of the talk, which I don't really think is quite a question, but is something that might be interesting just to reflect upon. This is by the Kiowa author N. Scott Momaday, and it's about the power of words. And I just wonder whether this would be something that would chime with your experience. So I'll just read it out from the chat. Words are intrinsically powerful, and there is magic in that. Words come from nothing into being. They're created in the imagination and given life on the human voice. You know, we used to believe, and I'm talking about all of us regardless of our ethnic background, in the magic of words. The Anglo-Saxon who uttered spells over his fields that the seeds would come out of the ground on the sheer strength of his voice knew a great deal about language, and he believed absolutely in the efficacy of language.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly the kind of idea that Amir El-Zain and also I are attempting to trace in those articles that I mentioned. I think the one bit that I might just highlight in that formulation is there's often a tendency when talking about these sort of ideas to say back in the ancient times, people thought or felt or believed that words had power or there was magic or this and that. But the more I look around the way that modern people use words and interact with the world around them, the more I think that the idea that those ideas have left us, it really is an illusion. That our life isn't as disenchanted as we might all think. Actually, I'm wearing this Secret History of Western Esotericism podcast t-shirt because I'm just constantly referring to it. He has a lovely podcast about the myth of the disenchanted universe, where he's in conversation with somebody who's written about how about that very idea. But otherwise, yes, that's precisely the kind of thing I'm getting at about the magic of poetry, which is really well spelled out in the Arabic in particular, but it's a very widespread idea as well. Thank you.
I will encourage questions into the question box, but I can continue like trying to come up with questions until we have some more things. I think people approving of our life isn't as disenchanted as people think. And I guess that is I don't know whether you've thought much about sort of fantasy writing in connection with your work, because I guess this is sort of I think one of the things that fantasy writers often have is a really intense belief in the power of words, and particularly the powers of stories as means of thinking through. I mean, and as of transforming older forms into forms that can speak to the modern world. So that, I mean, what an obvious example would be the tradition of the feminist rewriting of fairy tales to bring out the complexity of the gender politics that are there in the earlier versions, but to reinflect those in modern contexts. So, and I guess fantasy is concerned in some ways with a form of re-enchantment. A number of scholars have sort of discussed that. So, do you think there's a sort of close affinity with the kinds of occult practices you're discussing, or are there important differences between the two that we should be paying attention to as well?
Sure, there are important differences, but I'm just, for some reason, it's always more interesting and more in tune with my nature, I suppose, to look for the similarities. And I guess one thing that I would highlight is that even the ancient and medieval people often engage with these kind of things in a playful way. So it isn't always 100% clear that people did this or that because, yes, they believed in demons, this whole idea of belief. Sometimes It has an element of, well, this is just what we do. Just like us, like we might just put cookies out for Santa Claus. Is it because we believe that Santa Claus is going to eat the cookies? Or it's just there's a kind of playful half seriousness about the way that people practice magic that has always been there. So that's one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, I think like stories that we recognize as stories have a huge impact on the way that we make sense of our world. So like, for example, Philip Pullman's Golden Compass. Ever since I read that book, I imagine myself with like I have my little daemon animal. I think probably a lot of people do. And it's, I wouldn't want to have to explain too much what I mean by that or what it means to me, but just that it's meaningful to me. I often think of love poetry as well. I think love poetry is the real sort of magic of words, because it is this just a controlled and meter and rhyme expression of this desire that goes beyond ordinary human language. And you do it precisely in order, you hope, to move somebody with the power of your words and the power of your intention. And the potential effects of that, if your love poem is successful, go way beyond imagination. That could result in a marriage or a baby or something. So that's a few little stray thoughts on that theme. I could go on it.
There's a couple of different. We've got some questions in the Q&A now. I think I'll sort of blur together the first two, because there's one about the importance of, because I think you were talking about the importance that the original text places on performing the ritual exactly, otherwise terrible things will happen. But also, I think you were stressing process of fractured transmission. So we've got a question here about that, about the meaningfulness of performing these invocations accurately, about how that might be something that would differ between ancient and modern practices, or perhaps is always like a pretty vexed issue. And then there's another question about the importance of keeping things in oral traditions. What sort of are there sort of how do you feel about traditions that insist on maintaining orality rather than forms of writing down?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's clear that this manuscript I've been working on is really a written trace of an oral tradition. You can see lots of evidence that this is the result of a living conversation between master and student, essentially. And so it's already useless in a way to translate it as a written text. And I think a lot of what I'm doing in these playful adaptations is filling in those blanks with other things, I suppose. About the doing it correctly, I mean, there's two kind of ways of practicing magic that I'm seeing. One is you really do your mathematical calculations and you wait a year or more if necessary for the planets to be in just the right location and all of that. And then there's always these more playful trickstery types of magic as well. So you can find these medieval kind of woodblock talismans where clearly it's the language is wrong, but is it really wrong? No, it looks cool, and maybe it's almost like a fortune cookie type of thing, like you believe it and you don't believe it, kind of way of practicing magic. So there's there's two ways of looking at that. Should you get it right, or is it just a game? And there's lots of fuzzy room in between. And I think a lot of what Sakkākī was doing was clearly like a trickstery performance in a court setting to get power over various people. And the line between illusion and real magic is always very blurry there. When you look at where he got his invocations from, you can see that a lot of this is already like very corrupted Hebrew or Aramaic or Sanskrit, which was probably already totally deformed from whatever word it was by the time it got into Arabic. So what does it even mean to get that right? And then sometimes like the writing, it's half speech, half drawing, and it's meant to be a little beyond us, and it's meant to be a little bit impossible to 100% reproduce or understand correctly. I think that's part of it, weirdly. Like it's something that you reach for that's beyond our reach. That to me, that's part of what the occult is, I suppose. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. It has some really interesting resonances with, I guess, different forms of writing. Like in some ways, your more mathematical magic seems to have something about realism to it, that you like try and stick to the details of the world, and the truths are there in those details, whereas more fantastic or genre-based writing is prepared to exaggerate certain things or twist certain things or say things it knows not to be literally true in the attempt to get at a kind of other form of truth, to say a lie that speaks something true.
Right, exactly. Because magic is between science and art, isn't it? So I guess it's sort of depending on which side of the scale it's leaning towards.
And I think you're right to stress that it's always a spectrum of those two. Like
Yeah.
you do not have, I mean, if you were choosing to take an extreme position, that is a choice, and you can be in the middle a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Um, there's a question here which I think is probably a really interesting one, both in sort of technical terms and to talk about modern society here. So there's a question from Becky Jones. How do you see the power of large language models and how those programs are generating text and will soon be giving us search results, despite them having a 25% error rate, connecting to the power of words and language to shape reality? So I guess there's a larger cultural question about text generated from other text, about transmission. And then perhaps there's a very technical question about your own work, because I was thinking about Transcribus and the other kinds of programs that are supposed to be able to interpret manuscripts, and how absolutely useless they would be for the sort of translation that you're doing, which requires attention to the shape and those sorts of things.
I do think, I mean, everybody tells me, oh, well, the robots will be able to do it all
Mm.
eventually, but I actually don't think that there are any robots that could try to make sense of these manuscripts I'm working with. They are such a mess. Like even by medieval Arabic manuscript standards, they're bad Arabic to begin with. Also like they are a woven together just hodgepodge of Greek, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, maybe some sort of Turkic shamanic things coming in there. So it is kind of like a grab bag of language. And I guess the way that AI works, I don't know that much about AI. And then there's this whole idea of personhood, I suppose. Like, where does personhood emerge in this kind of network of information and language and ideas? I think that's a question we were struggling with before AI even came along. Like, where is our individuality in this voice, in our voice, Roland Barthes' tissue of citations and all of that.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't really have any answers but it's certainly like an evocative sort of question to play with.
It is, yeah. And I guess in some ways, like, because one of the ways that AI works is probabilistic. Like when you start typing something, it will think what the next most likely word is from the text corpus it has. So really, it's doing the opposite of some of these things that certain magical texts are doing, or of the opposite of the things that certain kinds of creative writing are doing, where you're trying to find the unexpected turn or those sorts of things. So this is why I'm I don't know. I'm not hugely worried about AI taking over certain kinds of creative or academic practice, because it is so much about the interaction of a very particular mind with those things rather than a kind of generalized consensus.
Well, I mean, the point of the humanities, I guess, is precisely to study what it means to be human. So this only makes that question even more interesting. So yeah, it's I don't. I think I'm a sort of optimist by nature, but I weirdly don't feel that worried about it either. I don't know.
I think, like, yeah. So there's another question here in the Q&A about sort of, I think, effectively connections and embeddedness and situatedness in your work. So I will read it out. This is from Sarah. I was struck during your talk about how connections appeared throughout your academic practices in the dreaming realm, the mortal with the supernatural, through the occult incantations, words with their mispronounced meanings, and also with yourself and those around you. And I wonder what your thoughts would be on the creation of these connections in the occult and in translations. So really,
The I'm sorry, I might have slightly zoned out at the beginning of that question. Could you
okay,
possibly reformulate it?
yeah, I think it's asking you to reflect on the importance of like kind of freedom to draw connections. So in work, so not just sort of
Hmm.
seeing yourself as doing one thing in a box, doing a strict technical translation at all times, but like the importance of strange connections to occult practices and the importance of like I guess serendipity in some ways in transmission and translations.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I mean, actually this was I felt I felt quite insecure at first and embarking on this research project, partly because the tradition that I'm working in was a tradition that was mainly, so that Sadhuna, the Indian lady, was the only woman in there for one thing, and it was mainly sort of ritually pure men, and from a kind of elite, so not necessarily Muslim men, they could be Christian or Jewish or even Hindu, various religious traditions, but kind of ritually pure men in this oral tradition of a master to student, which I clearly wasn't, and I was clearly getting so much wrong. Um, and I I guess a lot of like what you just saw me give a presentation about is how I kind of faced that fear, embraced it, made it the focus of my translation in a way. And actually weirdly a lot of that did come from kind of dreams I had in early in the project, where I had anxieties about it, and the dreams were like, don't worry, do this, have fun. And I kind of took that and ran with it a little bit. So yeah, I I guess the gosh, I don't know, maybe I'm just trying to justify myself desperately, and that's the entire root of my research and this so-called dream theory. But I think it is also just really important for my students who are coming onto the Magic MA, because so many of them I think are going to have similar anxieties, similar feelings of inadequacy. And I guess I'm trying to blaze a trail by which we can humbly, I think it is important to remain humble, be humbly be brave about it, and also be like, stay safe, try not to go crazy, seeing signs and all of the tortellini. And so this is just some of the issues that I've been wrestling with, which is precisely what this presentation is about, really.
Yeah, and I think it's a really wonderful presentation about openness to interpretation, about admitting that we're not trying to get to necessarily the only correct and logical answer. These texts are never going to transmit flawlessly, and that there'll be mistranslations and connections. But still, like I think it will be really empowering for your students in some ways that you do have like a clear body of material that you'll be studying masters, but they're not coming to that knowing, they're not coming to that as blank states. They're coming to that as people with their own particular concerns and ideas, and they can bring something to that material, which might involve the tools of traditional scholarship, but also involve something personal and
Well,
resonant for
one
them.
thing that I think is really important is this idea of hospitality to the other. I'm slightly influenced by the philosopher Levinas in that, who took the kind of idea of hospitality as the foundation for his philosophy. So, like, first of all, let's ground ourselves in some sound methodologies. So whether you're using archaeology or philology or historical methodologies, get those down first. That will be our base. And then if we're going to get creative and experiential and a little bit weird, let's make sure that we're coming to that from a place of kind of kindness, I suppose, and openness to other types of ways of knowing and experiencing other religions and cultures and genders and ways of seeing the world. So that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to end on that note of kind of hospitality as well.
It's recognizing the face of the other, and that is a different face, but also a face with which you can reconcile or connect in various ways. I think that's. I think we're to the end of our time, and I think that's also a lovely note to end on. So, can I invite you to spam your emotes wildly in appreciation for this wonderful keynote by Emily. I think if you want to carry on discussions, you can carry them on in the Discord chat. If you want to reach out to Emily directly, I think your email address is on the Exeter site that I linked.
Right. There's loads of little comments in the chat, which I'm afraid I haven't had time to read. I don't know if those will be preserved in some form.
We can download the chat, I think.
Thank
I
you.
will just save the chat and we can send that on to you at this
Okay.
point.
Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone for attending here. We now have a 15-minute break and then we're into the afternoon panel sessions. So thank you for continuing to spare. Let's continue to do that, but then depart, grab yourself some tea and prepare for some more wonderful papers.